Hey everyone! Welcome to another episode of Renton Reflects. I must confess that this was not one of my favorites to come from Disney when I was a little kid, though, ironically, it grew to become one of my favorites in my adult years. Before I can explain what I mean by this, allow me to give you a rundown of what happens in this movie, for those of you not familiar with it. Essentially, it's an animated retelling of the legend of Robin Hood, a heroic outlaw who robbed from the rich to give to the poor. All of the characters in this version are portrayed by anthropomorphic animals, which I must admit was a very clever choice, not only in the casting of species for each character, but as a little kid, it helped me understand the legend of Robin Hood a bit better. Now, in the story, the villainous Prince John had managed to usurp the throne while his brother King Richard is off fighting in the Crusades, and he gets a little carried away in collecting taxes from the poor people of England. So it's up to Robin Hood and his companion Little John to set things right for all of the poor citizens of Nottingham. One of the reasons this movie was not one of my favorites as a kid, even though I did like it back then, is because there were a few artistic choices that I felt were a little out of place, and not just because of the historical anachronisms, though they're mostly rather minor and don't bother me as much nowadays. Over the years, as I was learning more about Disney's animation history, the more I understood the trials and tribulations the filmmakers went into making their movies during the creative process. In this movie's case, I did read up on a few sources saying that there was the initial idea of having the story take place in the American Deep South, which does explain why a few of the characters have Southern accents. Ultimately, the filmmakers decided to have the story take place in medieval England, which I feel works a lot better. I'm personally grateful to have been born into a generation of home video, in which I could watch movies at home over and over again, and thus pick up on a few things I may not have noticed in the theater. One thing I did notice, even as a little kid, is the fact that Disney would sometimes recycle its animation across many of its hand-drawn animated projects. It was not uncommon for them to do that, especially in the 1960s and 1970s, mainly due to budgetary reasons. This movie is one of those cases in which the recycling is definitely noticeable, though that's if you have a very keen eye and a keen sense of hearing. In addition to recycling bits of its own animation and audio clips, the movie sometimes recycles animation from other Disney films, such as Snow White, Cinderella, The Jungle Book, and The Aristocats. This was mainly a way for the filmmakers to meet the deadline. This doesn't by any means make the film feel all that cheap, for there is still some wholesomeness and amusing entertainment value put into it, what with it having memorable songs, memorable characters, memorable lines of dialogue, even a few memorable gags. I also do admire the laid-back approach in the storytelling, as well as the amount of gravitas and weight put into the character animation, making the characters themselves seem very believable and, for lack of a better choice in words, appear more than two-dimensional. The older I get, the more I appreciate the effort the filmmakers went into making this movie, despite the financial limitations they may have faced. At least it was executed in a way that it left a significant mark on our culture, to the point of possibly serving as a catalyst in the formation of the furry fandom. Not to mention that there are cosplayers who sometimes dress as their favorite characters from the movie, and a couple of the songs have been used in commercials. Even film director Byron Howard was influenced by this movie to make Zootopia. While I can't say if it's the most perfect adaptation of the legend of Robin Hood, I will say that it's definitely one of the most memorable. One might even say that there are enough likable elements in it for one to cry out, "Oodalali!" It's a catchphrase of Robin Hood's in this version. If I were to give this movie a rating on a scale between 1 and 10, I'd give it a 7.5. And that concludes my review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.